This is the last scheduled meeting of the full Senate Judiciary Committee in this 118th Congress. I want to thank all of the members, and especially Senator Graham, who unfortunately does not feel well this morning, won't be joining us. But I want to thank him and all the members on the Republican side, as well as the Democratic side, and their staffs for the work we've done together. I look forward to working with Senator Grassley in the upcoming Congress. In 2018, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, opening floodgates for states to legalize sports betting. Once largely illegal, sports betting is now legal in over 36 states and the District of Columbia. Professional sports leagues, formerly the chief opponents of sports betting, now partner with sports books and have integrated gambling into their games and broadcasts. It is virtually impossible to watch a sporting event today without being barraged by ads encouraging you to bet or hearing from a celebrity endorser about the latest parlay you should try. And from the industry perspective, it's a very profitable development. Over $30 billion was bet on sports in the third quarter of 2024 alone, a nearly 30% increase over the previous year. But at what cost to the bettor? At what cost to the sport? At what cost to the school or the athlete? Let's turn to a video as by way of introduction to this hearing.
Breaking news: the Supreme Court this morning striking down the federal ban on sports betting. Now it leaves it up to the states.
38 states and Washington, D.C. have legalized sports betting.
And the sportsbook's message, bet, 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 is everywhere.
You're driving on the highway, there's a billboard for it. You're watching a show, there's a commercial for it. You're on your phone, there's an advertisement for it. It's probably testament to how much money's in the industry with it right now, but it's everywhere you look.
Gambling ads aired on TV 60,000 times in 2023, and the industry is expected to spend $1.3 billion in advertising in 2024.
$200 instantly. Just to bet $5.
The promotion strategy includes endorsements from celebrities and former athletes, as well as partnerships with media companies. Some teams have put gambling ads directly on the field and have even built brick-and-mortar sports books inside their stadiums.
The sports books and the commercials and the leagues themselves are making it look so cool to gamble and risk your money.
It's being marketed much more now as like fun, play, be happy, celebrate, sports, but just be aware that it destroys lives.
Now, addiction groups say problem gambling is on the rise, with more young people seeking help than ever before.
I had fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting. My life was completely shattered.
Gamblers have the highest suicide rate compared to any other addiction. I think that it being so enmeshed in society, we're really just at the beginning of it.
While gambling can be a form of entertainment when done responsibly, in many cases it is not being done responsibly. According to the National Council on Problem Gambling, an estimated 2.5 million adults may have a severe gambling problem. Another 5 to 8 million are estimated to have mild problems. With the advent of online sports betting, everyone's cell phone is a sports book, providing betting access 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. A person with a gambling problem can chase the action at the click of a button and rack up ever-increasing losses, whether on an NFL game or professional table tennis. I believe gambling operators must play a greater role in preventing addiction on the front end by helping identify problem gamblers and directing them to help. Last night I went to a reception. A fellow I didn't know came up to me and said, "Thanks for having this hearing." And I said, "What's your interest in it?" He said, "My son's at an Ivy League school. He bets every day, and his fellow students do too. It has become so common they hardly even think it's a new phenomenon that surely has been going on forever." Well, it was going on to some extent, but now it's being institutionalized and professionalized. Problem gambling is not the only negative side of legalized sports betting. As sports betting has spread, the actual games and cheering for your team have become less important for many individuals who are more focused on the point spread or player props. When a bet doesn't hit, angry bettors often take it out on the players. In a victory over Michigan State, last year's NCAA men's basketball tournament, North Carolina star Armando Bacot had a great game, scoring 18 points, 7 rebounds. But he didn't have enough rebounds to make a certain gambler's bets pay off. Bacot reported receiving over 100 messages from gamblers after the game berating him because they lost their bets. Or consider Carson Barrett, a little-used player on Purdue's 2024 men's basketball team. In the first-round NCAA tournament game, he played the final minutes of his team's blowout win. He even hit a three-pointer in the game's final seconds. While this may have been the culmination of a dream for Carson, his reward for making the basket in the tournament was bettors' messages urging him to kill himself. Why? His basket pushed his team's victory over the 26.5-point spread. Athletes, coaches, and officials also deal with temptation to adjust their performances to make bets hit. You don't have to look too far to find a recent sports betting scandal. Whether it's NBA player Jonte Porter taking himself out of games to cash in prop bets, or former Alabama baseball coach Brad Bohannon giving inside information to bettors about his team, these scandals will continue to pop up. It is critical that Congress look into sports betting's impact on America and determine how the industry should be regulated going forward. I thank our witnesses for helping us to explore these issues today. Before introducing the witnesses, Senator Tillis has told me that he does not have an opening statement. So should I proceed at this point? Thank you. Each senator is going to have 5 minutes to ask questions after the witnesses testify for 5 minutes each. Our first witness is going to be Charlie Baker, President of the National Collegiate Athletic Association, NCAA. Prior to taking his position with the NCAA, Mr. Baker served as governor of Massachusetts for 2 terms. Welcome. If you'll hold on just a second, I'm going to introduce all the panel and then swear you in, and off we go. We are also joined by Johnson Badamosi. Did I pronounce that correctly? Bad day. Mosi, right? He's a former collegiate and NFL football player. After his collegiate days at Stanford, he played in the NFL for 9 years and served as the NFL Players Association rep. Thanks for coming. We're next joined by Keith White. Mr. White serves as executive director at the National Council on Problem Gambling, a position he's held since 1998. The National Council serves as an advocate to mitigate gambling-related harm. Next witness is David Rebuck. Mr. Rebuck served as director of New Jersey's Division of Gaming Enforcement for 13 years before retiring in 2024. During his time as director, launched online gambling and sports betting. Mr. Rebuck now serves as a consultant to the American Gaming Association. Our final witness is Dr. Harry Levant. Dr. Levant is the Director of Gambling Policy with Public Health Advocacy Institute at Northeastern University School of Law. He also works as a therapist treating patients struggling with the addiction. He's a recovering gambling addict himself and has been in recovery for 10 years. So first I'm going to administer the oath and then we'll take the testimony. So if you all please rise and raise your right hand. You affirm the testimony you're about to give before this subcommittee be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Let the record indicate that all the witnesses, thank God, has answered in the affirmative. And Governor Baker, why don't you start?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you for this opportunity, and I want to thank the members for the committee for being here as well. As NCAA president, I see evidence every day of how much more complex the issues student athletes face today compared to what I experienced as a college basketball player some 45 years ago. In response, the NCAA has delivered transformative, long overdue changes to address the modern student athlete's needs. For example, the association now provides all student athletes with access to post-eligibility health insurance for injuries and mental health concerns that occurred while they were playing. Similarly, all Division I schools must provide elevated health and wellness benefits, guaranteed scholarships, and other academic support services. One emerging issue that certainly wasn't present during my playing days is the rapid expansion of legal sports betting. This is another area where we're deeply engaged in protecting and supporting student athletes. We've engaged experts to monitor contests for integrity issues. We've surveyed college students to find out how prevalent sports betting is. We've ramped up efforts to educate student athletes about the rules and the dangers of sports betting on campus, virtually, and through social media. We also monitor social media around our games. We refer the abusive, threatening, coercive, or downright criminal activity we uncover to the platforms or, in some cases, to law enforcement. It's important to note that a significant portion of this abusive content contains references to sports betting. There's no doubt that the rise of sports betting has impacted the NCAA and student athletes in a significant way. But none of the consequences are as challenging as the harassment and coercion student athletes are experiencing. We've conducted 4 different surveys over the last several months, and each one shows 10 to 15% of Division I student athletes have been harassed by bettors, more so in basketball and football, but in other sports as well. Student athletes publicly revealed they get demands for money from unhappy bettors for trivial things that don't impact the result on the field. But it doesn't stop there. Many have received death threats from bettors, and they also receive other in-person threats and accusations directed at them while they're leaving or coming onto the field of play. And unlike professional athletes, college students attend classes and live on campus. They're accessible to students and fans, some of whom, in fact, are probably the gamblers yelling at them when they're playing their game. Those differences increase the opportunity for threatening, coercive behavior across a massive number of participants in contests and create senseless risk. In many states, gambling regulators lack the authority to ban bettors for harassment. Instead, they rely primarily on the industry to share information across state lines. While we believe these disparities in state laws clearly warrant federal action, the NCAA is not waiting. We're lobbying states one at a time to make changes. West Virginia joined Ohio to pass legislation codifying anti-harassment measures related to sports betting. The West Virginia delegate who proposed the legislation represents areas bordering Pittsburgh. He noted the limited impact involuntary exclusion lists have when bettors can easily jump across state lines. In addition to West Virginia and Ohio, legislators and regulators ranging from New Mexico to Wyoming have advanced policy changes aimed at protecting student athletes from harassment by bettors. Despite the progress and the betting industry's persistent pushback, too many states with legal betting lack adequate protections for student athletes. That's why we're lobbying states to eliminate prop bets on individual student athletes. We understand sports betting's here to stay and why it's better to have it regulated than not. While we work effectively with many in the gambling industry to uncover integrity issues, we disagree with the casinos on the issue of prop bets. On the issue of prop bets, we believe that when bettors can't gamble on college athletes' individual performances, they're far less likely to attempt to scrutinize, coerce, or harass student athletes. And several states ban these types of bets for good reason. Before we started our campaign, 23 of the soon-to-be 39 states with sports betting permitted those bets. Today, only 19 still do. Should this committee develop legislation regulating sports betting, we strongly encourage banning prop bets on college sports. We also encourage federal authorities to do more to crack down on black market betting sites. We believe these sites are where many of the underage students who report betting are placing their bets. Lastly, federal legislation offers a significant opportunity to strengthen sport leagues' abilities to investigate integrity issues. I want to thank you once again for having me this morning, and I look forward to your questions and answers.
Thanks, Governor. Mr. Batamosi.
Chairman Durbin, members of the committee, thank you for convening this hearing to address the critical issue of legalized gambling in sports and for considering a possible legislative solution that would address issues of player safety, game integrity, and addiction prevention. I'm Johnson Batamosi, a native Washingtonian, Stanford graduate, 9-year NFL veteran, and sports fanatic. I remember two-a-day practices and playing high school football games on Buchanan Field, which is less than a mile from where I sit today. I began playing team sports to make friends and striving to earn a football scholarship because as a nurse, my single mother did not earn a salary that could pay the current cost of college tuition. President Teddy Roosevelt's quote regarding the man in the arena has always arrested me as particularly poignant. We all admire the athletes in an arena because of their intense efforts, valiance, dedication, and the fortitude it requires to compete at a high caliber and achieve excellent feats despite one or many obstacles. During my experience as a collegiate student athlete and when I joined the NFL as a professional 12 years ago, legalized gambling in sports, or sports betting as it has come to be, did not exist. But the intense scrutiny and external pressures that athletes often receive from fans and critics did. The sophistication of mobile devices and the rapid growth of media platforms has allowed for both fans and critics an opportunity to interact directly with the athletes that are subjects of their gaze. As a result, the rise of legalized sports gambling has increased levels of fan engagement, but has introduced more stress, new mental health challenges, and has increased the number of threats and incidents of harassment to both amateur and professional athletes. I have to acknowledge that incidents of harassment sometimes extend much further than internet exchanges, and acknowledge the families who have suffered from emotional distress or even the loss of a loved one. Words cannot begin to express the profound sorrow I feel that the sports we have played to bring our families and communities together have been perverted to a point where fans are attacking athletes. I know that many of you have been working many terms to protect amateur and professional athletes, to maintain integrity and fair play in sports. And we are grateful for your long-term dedication to this cause and your willingness to work together to help keep our communities safe. I also want to recognize the many athletes who have worked to raise awareness on these and other issues, push for change, and have collaborated with lawmakers on important legislation like the College Athletes Protection and Compensation Act and others to safeguard athletes' health and wellness and to save lives. My testimony today will focus on 4 key areas of legalized internet gambling in sports: the effect on players in the arena, the influence of fan engagement, the broader societal implications, and final congressional recommendations. Players have had pressure to perform well for professional achievements and to win games, but sports betting has added a new and complex layer to this issue. Social media has enabled athletes to take control of their brands and market themselves in ways not possible for previous generations. However, it has also opened an extremely accessible avenue for threats and harassment directed toward athletes and their families alike. Now, players are targeted by gamblers who seek insider information or pressure them to perform, not for the benefit of the team, but because the gambler is financially invested in a specific performance element of individual athletes. This has an overall negative effect on a player's physical security and mental state of mind. Examples of this behavior include harassment and even death threats, like those received by tennis pro Renata Zazura following her U.S. Open loss, or those received by one Buffalo Bills kicker for missing a field goal this season. These episodes have a clear negative impact on a player's mental health and overall well-being, and has the likelihood to distract a player during the time where focus is needed on the field to avoid injury and to perform at the highest levels. When the lights are off, the game is over, and the job is done, players return home to their families like all other citizens. Athletes are constituents and contributing members of your communities who patronize the same grocery stores and whose children attend the same schools as yours. For most athletes, there is no gated community or private security force, and yet they are too often exposed to the threats associated with problematic gambling. Player safety on and off the field is a priority, and safeguards must be put in place. While legalized sports gambling has deepened fan engagement in sports, it has simultaneously transformed the fan experience from enjoying a game to celebrating or lamenting amongst other fans. Some bad actors Fans. To some bad actors expressing resentment and misguided indignation towards any players perceived to cost a fan money, this behavior dehumanizes a player, treating them more akin to an analytical statistic. Fans who exhibit this kind of behavior should be nowhere near athletes, coaches, or others who are there to enjoy the game and cheer on their teams. The rapid expansion of legalized gambling has raised significant societal concerns, as I'm sure my colleagues testifying here today will share. While legalized sports gambling generates substantial tax revenue and economic opportunities for leagues in partnership with sports betting entities, it risks commodifying hope and devaluing sports as a pursuit of skill and integrity. The question is whether the commercialization of gambling undermines the essence of athletic competition. I believe that sports betting can be operated in a way where the integrity of the game is not compromised, but that will take significant efforts, both on and off the field, to ensure that gamblers and athletes are acting in good faith and athletes are not put in harm's way. Congress has a role to play in passing policies that reinforce the integrity of the game while also protecting athletes. To address these challenges, players' unions collectively have endeavored to have player protections included in states' legislation, such as advocating for prohibitions on negative bets, a prohibition on use or purchase of player biometric data for purposes of gambling, and ensuring full due process rights in sports betting conduct investigations by notifying the player and their respective labor union of a potential violation. Each of these recommendations is critically important. A prohibition on negative bets would ensure that fans are not gambling on negative outcomes and therefore do not have an incentive to heckle players or encourage negative outcomes at a game. Prohibiting the use of purchase of player biometric data would protect athletes from fundamental invasions of privacy and would ensure that players are in full control of their personal health information. And finally, ensuring due process rights and conduct investigations adheres to the bedrock legal principle of our judicial system that should be maintained in sports betting investigations. In conclusion, while legalized internet gambling in sports appears here to stay and can enhance fan engagement, it also possesses significant risks and has an insidious effect on the mental health outcomes of players, fan culture, and the integrity of sports. A balanced approach that prioritizes ethical considerations, player safety, and well-being is essential. Again, thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, sir. Mr. White.
Thank you, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Graham, and members of the committee for holding this important hearing regarding the impact of the expansion of sports gambling in the United States. Pardon me. I'm Keith White, Executive Director of the National Council on Problem Gambling, the sole national advocate for those suffering from problem gambling and their loved ones. NCBG speaks for the 9 million who suffer from a gambling addiction and the millions more in recovery. We bear witness to the devastating impacts of gambling addiction on individuals and their families, and to the effectiveness of services that provide hope and help. We can never eliminate the disease of addiction, but we can and must make better efforts to prevent and treat it. Our mission is to lead awareness and advocacy efforts to reduce gambling harm. Since NCBG was founded in 1972, we've remained nonpartisan and neutral, neither for nor against legalized gambling. NCBG members include 35 state affiliate chapters, as well as a wide variety of individuals and organizations, from counselors and researchers to people in recovery, from gambling, and as well as treatment clinics, regulatory authorities, gambling operators, sports leagues, and state human services agencies. Since 2018, 38 states in the District of Columbia have legalized sports betting. In fact, now over half of the senators on this committee have legal sports betting in their state, whereas none did in 2018. Ads for sports betting are now run frequently across all media, even in states where sports betting is illegal. Betting is now ingrained in college and professional sports, as you've heard. As I said in my testimony before the House Judiciary Committee in September 2018, we are concerned about the collision of three trends: vast increases in gambling advertising, especially exhortations to gamble during the game, advances in technology, including mobile online sports betting, and a virtually unlimited menu of betting opportunities on the games nowadays, including some of the things Johnson mentioned, bets on players' individual performance. Mobile and online sports gambling technology provides opportunities to enhance responsible gambling features, including setting personalized limits and self-exclusion programs, but it also further increases risk factors for gambling addiction. And it's clear gambling problems have grown over the past 6 years, especially among young male online sports bettors. While this increase from 2018 is unprecedented, our 2024 data shows that the increase in risky gambling behavior appears to have leveled off, though there are still 9 million people, as Chairman Durbin said, with gambling problems, and it's far too early to assume the rates are stable. Many factors affect these rates, including risk factors like increased advertising, as well as protective factors such as expanded prevention programming and greater public awareness of the harm that can result from a decision to gamble. While sports betting has garnered enormous public attention recently, most Americans did not place a sports bet in the past year, and it remains important to recognize that problematic gambling behavior extends well beyond sports and demands a broader national public health approach. Public health involves partnerships with communities, health providers, social services, and the gambling industry. We have to look intently but critically to policies in other countries to ensure that our solutions are embedded in the nation's cultural, political, and economic systems. We have to recognize that state and tribal governments have historically overseen gambling in accordance with constitutional precedent. Unfortunately, however, many of these same governments have never invested in their problem gambling programs or created strong, responsible gambling regulations. While 2023 saw a historic high of $134 million in public funding invested in state problem gambling programs, that still represents only 50 cents per capita, which is 338 times less public funding than is devoted to substance abuse. It's clear that state governments have not provided nearly enough support. And it's also true that public health is a shared responsibility between the states and the federal government. NCBG therefore strongly supports the Gambling Addiction Recovery, Investment, and Treatment Act introduced by Senator Blumenthal this year. The GRID Act provides critical funding to prevent, treat, and research gambling addiction without increasing taxes or government bureaucracy. Put simply, the GRID Act returns nearly half of the sports betting excise tax revenue to state health agencies. Increasing access to problem gambling treatment is the most important aspect of GRIT. NCBG estimates that every dollar spent to prevent and treat gambling addiction saves government at least $2 in criminal justice and healthcare-related social costs. The evidence is overwhelming that expanded sports betting has led to increased harm on a national scale. It is therefore essential for Congress to pass Senator Blumenthal's GRID Act. We believe this practical and life-saving legislation is the single most important action Congress can take to address the negative impacts of expanded sports betting and gambling in general. Thank you very much for the time. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Mr. White. Mr. Rebuck.
Good morning, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Graham, and distinguished members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about the regulation of legalized sports betting in New Jersey. My name is Dave Rebuck, and I served as Director of the Division of Gaming Enforcement in New Jersey from 2011 to 2024, and have recently retired from public service. As background on the division, it is a law enforcement agency that is responsible for the regulation of New Jersey's retail and online casino industry and its retail and online sports wagering operations performed by state casinos and its racetracks. During my tenure as director, I led a strategic overhaul of the state's gaming laws, which included spearheading new initiatives to ensure compliance with existing laws and the gaming industry's compliance with new and soon-to-be regulated forms of gaming. In 2013, New Jersey became the second state to launch online casino gambling. And in 2018, after a protracted legal battle in which the state ultimately prevailed, DGE, under my direction, oversaw the development and implementation in New Jersey's framework for legalized sports wagering. My testimony has been submitted. I do not intend to read it to you today, but I am here today as a proud advocate for state-led regulation of legal gaming, including sports wagering, and to explain why the states and tribal jurisdictions that oversee sports wagering and not the federal government are best equipped to address the issues presented. However, let me highlight to you some important points to provide you with the confidence that the past successes in effectively and efficiently regulating a multitude of gambling activities by states and tribal jurisdictions will continue with sports wagering. First, I want to emphasize that legalizing and regulating sports wagering is fundamentally about protecting consumers, the vulnerable, the underaged, preventing fraud, and ensuring the suitability of all entities to engage in gambling and their integrity of operations. Second, many states, like New Jersey, have enacted constitutional bans on gambling. However, our citizens, through constitutional referendums, have steadily acted to remove those bans. For example, in New Jersey, a multitude of well-regulated legal gambling options exist for decades before sports wagering, including betting on horse racing, creation of a state lottery, gambling on bingo, raffle sales, wagering on boardwalk and arcade games, and establishing casinos. Third, not unlike virtually every commercial function in our country, the confluence of the internet access and historical retail gambling games has substantially expanded the landscape of how citizens desire to engage in gambling. The total capacity for gambling today is as large as ever because its citizens desire the freedom to choose to engage in activities that were in the past prohibited. Wagering on sports is clearly defined by this new freedom. Before legalization, millions of people wagered billions of dollars annually through illegal operations and often committed fraud, evade taxes, and in many instances were tied to organized crime. These illegal operators offer no protections, leaving Americans vulnerable to identity theft and worse. Today, every state in this nation has illegal gambling, including sports wagering, available readily to its citizens. The ease of access to these websites can be viewed by anyone while in the state and violating state and federal laws, and they're flaunted with impunity. Finally, I do not underestimate the challenges that come with regulating sports wagering, such as responsible gambling and ensuring compliance with regulatory standards. However, states are already addressing these challenges head-on, with many adopting best practices like mandatory self-exclusion, partnership with addiction treatment providers, partnerships with universities, such as our partnership with Rutgers University, to engage in evidence-based research in order to best design practices reducing gambling harms. Finally, I want to indicate the industry is also well engaged in this research. They recognize the critical importance also to sustain their operations by deploying best practices for responsible gaming and reduce problem gambling harm. They recently established the Responsible Online Gaming Association. The investment of $20 million is a profound commitment to engage in research that will identify, implement, and propose best practices for responsible online gaming that is performed by them. In closing, I urge the committee to respect the successes the states have achieved in regulating in the past, and federal oversight is clearly not needed. Federal cooperation on certain issues have already begun, and we look forward to continue with collaborating with agencies like FinCEN, Department of Justice, to do good work. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to answering any questions continuing in the future.
Thanks, Mr. Rebuck. Dr. Labatt.
Good morning. You will hear often this morning the words responsible gaming. This is code for gambling industry self-regulation and state control. I am here this morning to offer Congress a different approach to regulating the industry from a prevention of harm perspective as an issue of public health. I'm grateful to Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Graham, and the distinguished members of this committee for the opportunity to offer testimony regarding the public health crisis created by the unprecedented expansion of online sports gambling. It is my hope this is the start of public dialogue and debate, which will result in Congress enacting much-needed legislation to bring comprehensive public health reform and regulation to the sports gambling industry. I serve dual roles as Director of Gambling Policy with the Public Health Advocacy Institute at Northeastern University School of Law and as an internationally certified gambling addiction counselor. This permits me to clinically treat patients and families suffering with gambling addiction while simultaneously serving as a researcher and policy advocate working for public health reform. I am also a gambling addict in recovery. I made my last bet on April 27, 2014, and on that same night nearly took my own life. With gambling addiction, the risk of suicide is omnipresent. Research shows that 1 in every 2 people suffering will contemplate suicide, and 1 in 5 will attempt. In the grips of my addiction, I devastatingly hurt many people who had loved and trusted me. This included clients, friends, my kids, and the people closest to me. Personal carnage related to gambling addiction destroys the most trusted and intimate relationships, often beyond repair. Gambling addiction took my mind, my soul, body, and conscience. It left me broken, battered, and homeless. I was unrecognizable to myself. The only thing I had remaining was my name. On February 15, 2015, I stood in a courtroom in Philadelphia, a court where I had practiced law for more than 2 decades and where my father had practiced for more than half a century. In the presence of the court, the clients I had betrayed, my children, and more, I pled guilty to financial crimes committed in the throes of my gambling addiction. On that day, I pledged under oath to the court that if I could get well and find recovery, I would give back by doing everything in my power to prevent others from suffering. I come before this distinguished body filled with a deep sense of gratitude, respect, and purpose. The mission has never been more important. We are presently witnessing the early years of a fast-building public health crisis, and the time is now for Congress to act. We have known for more than 12 years that gambling is an addictive product, and gambling disorder and addiction similar to heroin, opioids, tobacco, alcohol, and cocaine. With every other addictive product, government regulates the advertising, promotion, distribution, and consumption. Sadly, with gambling, the exact opposite is occurring. The gambling industry business model is designed to deliver constant and nonstop action on every phone, tablet, and computer. With the use of technology and AI, the industry and its sports and media partners have turned every micro moment in each game or event into more and more gambling action. From the speed of the next pitch, football snap, basketball shot, as the chairman mentioned, even ping pong from Eastern Europe. The gambling industry and its sports partners have taken sports away from the children, families, and American people. Sports have become the equivalent of a nonstop slot machine. Understand, I am not opposed to sports gambling. In fact, I support its properly regulated legalization. However, I am vehemently opposed to what has happened in just 6 years. What has been launched on the American people is a newly created AI-generated online gambling business model, which delivers a fundamentally different, defectively designed, and inherently dangerous product to every phone, tablet, computer, and TV. The gambling industry has expanded to include once unthinkable partnerships, which include sports leagues, teams, owners, players, the world's largest media and tech companies, social media, AI, and state governments themselves. All are acting in concert to deliver online gambling at light speed and ensure the action never stops. The new AI-fueled business model will inexorably result in increased gambling addiction and gambling-related harm. I see this every day in my practice as a clinician. So how did we get here, and why is it essential that Congress act now? There are 2 quick answers to this question. First, online sports gambling is a fundamentally different and more dangerous product than ever could have been imagined. In fact, DraftKings recently purchased an AI company called SimpleBet, so that DraftKings now owns the technology to deliver targeted AI-generated gambling to each individual user. The second, follow the money. Sports leagues, teams, owners, and players now sell their data to the gambling industry. Every single sport. The industry then turns this data into instant micro-betting opportunities where the action never stops. The industry, having spent billions with a B to acquire this data, has only one way to recoup their money and turn a profit. They're selling no widgets in the marketplace. They are converting this data into more and faster instant gambling action. And that is a matter of public health. I don't come here only to warn. I come armed with public health policy solutions, and I hope we will address many of these during the Q&A. I'm presently privileged to work with Senator Blumenthal and Congressman Tonko. I look forward to working with many more of you, and I invite your questions.
Thanks, Dr. Laban. Appreciate it. Each of us is going to have 5 minutes to ask questions on the panel, and that's not nearly enough time. When I took a look at this issue, there are so many aspects to it and so many people affected by it. I hope we can at least open the discussion today. We certainly won't exhaust the subject by any means. Governor Baker, I'm going to start with you, but I'm going to ask the panel to listen to the question. Perhaps they'll want to give their own opinion. So we live at a time where a prospect, basketball, football prospect in high school could be lured with tens of thousands of dollars to a college to play sport, perfectly legal. And that young man, in this example that I'm using here, may come from a family that has had no experience with any money at all in their lives, very modest family, just happened to have a star athlete in their household. He goes to the school, starts off on the basketball team, and at some point becomes quite a player of repute. Reaches out to many others to encourage them to follow him in sports. Comes a day when his college roommate says, I need to talk to you before the next game. Between you and me, I'm going to ask you to do one thing, just one. I promise I'll never ask again. Miss the first 2 foul shots, and I'll never bother you again. And he says, that's it? Just miss the first 2. You may do that already, but I need you to do that for me. He goes out in the game and is tempted by the possibility of doing that, thinking it's a rather harmless request, not knowing what's behind it all, and we can all guess what might be behind it all. At risk is not only that athlete and his future, if that's ever discovered, but the integrity of sports itself. Going back to 105 years ago in the Black Sox scandal, gambling and sports have been a lethal combination. Pete Rose is further evidence of that. So we're in a situation where college sports are now reaching a level of massive investments for NIL and other incentives to bring students to school or to put them in portals, move them to another school, and betting is on top of it. As a head of the NCAA, representing schools all across America, how do you view this phenomenon?
Well, I certainly share your concern about what, in essence, is an example that involves a prop bet. And one of the reasons why we've been working hard to get all states to prohibit prop bets on college sports is, for example, for exactly the reason you just raised. I've actually talked to student athletes who have told me 100 versions of exactly the same story you just told me, which is the pressure that they feel, social pressure and other pressure from classmates, schoolmates, people they know, friends, people around the sports community, to do certain things that aren't going to affect the outcome of the game, but will absolutely help, quote unquote, somebody make their number. And that's part of the reason why, for us, this prop betting issue in particular is so fundamental. I mean, the example that you used about Armando Bacot having what he thought was a pretty good game in the tournament in which UNC actually won and getting more than 100 messages directed at him because he didn't get, quote unquote, enough rebounds. Those stories are everywhere. And I think one of the most fundamental opportunities that we have to take at least some of the pressure off a lot of these young people is to get prop bets out of the system. It's an enormous problem for them, and it creates an incredible amount of harassment, social pressure, and abuse, period.
So let me congratulate Senator Tillis for landing at his state university Bill Belichick, one of the legends.
I was going to bring that up.
One of the legends in football.
We're quite familiar with him in Massachusetts, yeah.
So this last week they published his contract in more detail than I think usually is disclosed, how much he's being paid and so forth, and the people he's going to hire to be part of his operation from the NFL. Interesting investment in talent for the university. And then the last item was $20 or $23 million that is going to be used for incentives to bring athletes to the university. This is a big money operation. I'm not so naive to believe University of North Carolina is unique in this situation. But with all this money coming in and gambling superimposed on top of it, how do we preserve anything that looks like a credible sporting event, let alone amateur-type athletics?
It's too bad that Senator Welch just left, because I was planning to congratulate him on the fact that University of Vermont won the D1 National Soccer Championship last night. About as amateur a team as you're going to find competing in Division I. I think the part of our objective on dealing with the money is this settlement that we've negotiated with a number of plaintiffs on a series of cases that typically involve NIL and other stuff that date back 10 years. And the point behind settling these cases was on our side to create structure around enhancing the benefits and the opportunities and the rev share for student athletes who play in programs and at schools that have really significant success in athletics. And I think that is ultimately, if we can succeed in getting this thing done. We got preliminary approval from the judge earlier this year, and she is going to have her final hearing on this in April. I do believe this will make it possible for us to create structure around this. And on some level, honestly, I think the fact that we could be in a position to put literally hundreds of millions of dollars directly into the hands of young people through their athletic performance and their schools will, in some respects, help on some of these larger issues associated with sports betting. But the abuse and the harassment and the beatdown, not to mention the social pressure that you talked about that they deal with right now in this space because of the prop bet element that's attached to this, is not going to go away unless we manage to figure out some way to get prop bets out of college sports. And that's why we've been spending so much time going state to state to make that happen.
Thank you, Governor. Before I turn to Senator Tillis, Mr. Batamose, a lot of people in Chicago are paying a lot of attention to Gonzaga graduates now. We thank you for being here today. Senator Tillis.
Thank you all for being here today. Governor, I have hated the New England Patriots since the infamous snowplow game against my Miami Dolphins.
Ron Meyer, I remember.
Yeah. When I lived in Boston. But now I've found a way to actually have a warm place in my heart for at least one person associated with the Patriots.
We appreciate that.
And I guess in full disclosure, I don't bet. The only bets I make are with my brothers, and the payoff involves acts of public humiliation. So I'm so sorry for Ms. Levant what you're going through, but I'm glad that we're having the hearing today to talk about getting this right, because I think too many states are getting it wrong. I think of the 38 states that have legalized sports betting, 34 have prop betting, for example.
Smaller number than that. We've managed to, it's about 19 that still have it.
Still 19, good. So that's a good trend. But I'm going to get, and time allowed, to one suggestion I think we should have on a path forward. But I never miss an opportunity to bring up, well, first off, there's a lot of money involved here, and there's a lot of headwinds against this. And I'd like to give you an example of one of those players who I think supports and is making money off of prop betting and generally sports betting. That's the Eastern Band of the Cherokee. Now, how does that come up into this hearing? Well, I just happen to be spending a lot of quality time with the Eastern Band of the Cherokee debating why they're spending all this money that they're making off of gambling, trying to prevent a tribe that has been denied recognition for 130 years from getting recognition in the state of North Carolina. I'm not going to get into the details of this except for one William Pipeston, who's making millions of dollars in targeted lobbying, in this case, to try and defeat my efforts to get a tribe recognized after 130 years of patent bias, racism, and a number of other factors, using money that they're deriving from sports gambling to do that. And believe me, they're going to have an army of people raising millions of dollars to prevent us from trying to scope this down to a level to where we allow this legal market to exist, because, to Mr. Rebuck's point, it's going to exist. So government has to exist to make it as safe and as minimize the impacts as possible. I don't believe that you're going to find the Eastern Band of the Cherokee, who I believe are just this week announcing a new casino that they're going to be managing in Danville, Virginia, all excited about more prop betting, more revenue for them. You can take that down. I'm kind of curious about in some respects, I think in abstract, the sports betting issue and the marijuana legalization issue, first off, there seems to be a pretty substantial correlation between states who have legalized marijuana and states who are legalizing sports betting. The challenge that we have is we have a patchwork of laws now around the marijuana trade, and we have a patchwork of laws around the sports betting trade. And so it really raises the question of how can we get to a place where when a market exists, and it has persisted for thousands and thousands of years, a gambling market, how do we make it safe? How do we address the negative consequences which will invariably occur? And how do we resource the various agencies to make sure that we can do that? And I, for one, think that in the same way that hopefully next year we'll have this discussion about marijuana, Mr. Reebok, I disagree with you on the lack of need for federal guidelines. I do not want, as a matter of federal law, I would never vote as a matter of federal legislation to legalize gambling at the federal level, in the same way that I wouldn't for marijuana. But I would be very open to an independent commission that would be tasked by this body to spend a year putting together guardrails and a framework that makes sense so that states who choose to have an affirmative vote and a law that is either signed by or overridden by, signed by a governor or overridden by a governor, that they have to conform to certain rules of the road. If we do that, the federal government's going to have to play a role. And what concerns me is if we don't, the American people don't know the difference between with AI and with the sophistication of technology today. If we don't figure out some way to authenticate the sportsbook operations that are legitimate to avoid international influences, all the other things that we have to look at, you only do that through federal supervision at some point. You have to have the resources available to do it. So I think we should start thinking ahead in the next Congress. I know you've been an effective chair, but I don't think you're going to get this solved before you pass the gavel over. And if I'm willing to bet on that, incidentally. But I think what we need to do is recognize that this is interstate commerce. If you're in a state that's not legalizing it, you're naive if you don't think they're gambling. In the same way, if you're in a state that doesn't have pot legal, then you're going to the eastern band of the Cherokee and buying pot that for some reason you can buy in western North Carolina. There's not a legal place you can transport it out of the eastern band of the Cherokee's boundary, for example. So maybe we need to start thinking about rules of the road. I'm kind of going on the pot angle, but on the gambling angle to get this right, or it's going to get worse, and the bad actors are going to exploit more. We're going to destroy a game that I'm fanatic over. We're going to destroy this game because of all the other pressures that are coming in and influencing the product. Thank you all for being here today.
Senator, may I briefly address your comment?
Yes, please.
Senator, I would agree with you that there absolutely needs to be a level of federal oversight. And I would respectfully suggest that's what Senator Blumenthal's bill, the Safe Bet Act, does. It sets minimum federal standards. States can regulate more if they like, but it sets minimum federal standards. And in so doing, would create the opportunity to solve Governor Baker's problem, which I agree with. Prop bets where we are literally taking young athletes who in May were at their senior prom and are on an athletic field in September, and people are betting on everything they do. Congress could, and the Safe Bet Act does it. Safe Bet Act eliminates college prop bets. It would be a minimum standard. Governor Baker is going to exhaust himself going state to state to state. However, he's right, and Congress could make that, as it is in the Safe Bet Act, one of the minimum federal standards. States could do more. They would retain control, but Congress would be able to speak. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Reebok, in your testimony, you advocate for state-led regulation of legal gambling, including sports betting. In my home state of California, as you know, not just the most populous state in the nation, but for purposes of today's discussion, the largest market of any state in the nation, you cannot talk about gaming in any context without respecting the role of our 109 federally recognized tribes. The voters of California granted tribes exclusivity in gaming operations nearly a quarter century ago, and this commitment must be maintained in any attempts to legalize and expand sports betting. Now, in order to maintain a model that respects tribal sovereignty and their exclusive rights to the state's gambling industry, California would require a uniquely tailored approach to any legislation that integrates sports betting. Can you discuss how you handled any similar stakeholder dynamics in New Jersey when you oversaw the legalization and implementation of sports betting there?
Your question has to deal with the jurisdictional sovereignty of Indian tribes that are clearly recognized under federal law, and I would say are regulated today by the federal government. The Indian tribes do not exist in tribal lands in New Jersey, so to answer specifically your question, I did not interact with the Indian tribes in that regard. But I have a high degree of confidence in the regulatory ability of Indian tribes. I've met with many of them. We've shared information. A number of Indian tribes today are clearly engaged in sports wagering, as was just mentioned in North Carolina. Their standards, their regulations flow through the government, the federal government, that has almost a test bed, if you wanted to work with Indian tribes to do things that otherwise you think they're not doing well today in their efforts. The issues in California with the rejection of sports wagering was delivered by the disappointment of Indian tribes being not consulted, not involved, and as a stakeholder in what direction the state of California would move forward if they were to authorize sports wagering. I work closely in New Jersey with 3 Indian tribes who are licensees and operate in New Jersey. Seminole tribe in Florida, the Mohegan tribe from Connecticut, the Mohawk and Kanawaki tribe from actually Canada. They are very talented, very dedicated to ensuring integrity of operations exists, suitability exists. They are no different in their regulatory authorities than what exists in states today. So I share your concern, and I would suggest you are on the right line of absolutely including them in any dialogue that has to deal with an expansion of sports wagering to their tribal lands or to the states that they're located in.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rebick, and I want to thank you and all the witnesses for testifying on today's subject. I would ask not just Chairman Durbin, but the incoming leadership of this committee in the next session, that to the extent that we're going to continue to have this conversation, to continue to explore this area, that we must include the perspectives, the voices, the participation of tribal leaders on panels like we're seeing in today's hearing. I also want to end with not a question for Mr. Baker, but an invitation for an ongoing conversation. Not to go off too much on a tangent, but even without the amount of money that wagering on collegiate sports is generating, there has been an issue of the flow of money in collegiate sports and the treatment of student athletes. How much money in collegiate sports? I mean, Coach Belichick's contract is just one of many, many, many examples, let alone the amounts of money that we know is going into facilities, arenas, stadiums, et cetera. And I raise this because it seems that for a long time, we've lost sight of the term student athletes, which is an NCAA invention, I understand. And it's really an athlete student. What comes first? The treatment of students, young people, women and men, as students first that happen to play a sport, or athletes first and get an education if you can. I'd like to pursue conversations about some of the reforms that we've made in the state of California that pays attention to, for example, academic support for student athletes when graduation rates by university, by specific program, basketball, football, et cetera, are or are not at certain thresholds? What happens to a student athlete's scholarship should they suffer an injury? Are they just left out to dry, or do we give them ongoing support to complete their education? Because if they're a student first and an athlete second, that's our obligation to them. Or when a coach comes in and wants their own preferred recruited running back or point guard or something else. So I know it's been a area of concentration for you since you've taken over the leadership at the NCAA, but it seems to have gotten lost in the conversation about wagering, NILs, and so much more. So look forward to continuing that with you.
Can I stop for a quick
Sure.
I just want you to know, I think you'll be pleased to know that starting in August, all Division I athletes keep their scholarship whether they play or not, and that's their decision. 10 years, they keep their scholarship, however long it takes for them to graduate. The post-eligibility insurance program that will cover any injury that they receive while they're playing, if they're still in treatment when they leave school, is going to carry for 2 years. And there's a whole series of supports for mental health and health and well-being services and academic services as well. We just released, I think about 2 months ago, and we'll send it to your office, Senator, the data on graduation rates, and student athletes across all 3 divisions graduate at a higher rate than any of their peers, no matter how you do the math, by class, by ethnicity, by race, by gender, it doesn't matter. Student athletes actually have made a lot of progress in this area, and I give them and the schools they attend enormous credit. But I will make sure we send all this information to your office. And we'll send it to the committee as well.
Thanks. Senator Blackburn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. Mr. Rebuck, I want to come to you. We know that the U.S. is going to be the epicenter, if you will, for sports. We've got the World Cup in 26. We've got the Olympics in 28. And as we were working on some of this for the hearing, I was really surprised to see that 10% of organized crime revenue is made from sports betting. And that to me is something that's a little bit concerning. And match fixing has become a concern, looking at these high-profile events that are coming our way. And Senator Cortez Masto and I recently sent a letter over to the DOJ on this very issue. And I would like for you to just comment. You've set up some of these gambling operations. So comment a little bit on what more needs to be done to address match fixing and these harms.
Thank you for that question. I can relate to you what New Jersey did when we won the case in PASPA. I approached in the governor's office at that time, Governor Phil Murphy, with the question of we need to reach out to the plaintiffs, the leagues and the NCAA, because they will have to be our partners to ensure the integrity of their matches, the training and education of their athletes, the structure that they have for overseeing compliance issues in gambling are at the highest level, and we will work with them. But first,
so you're looking for a partnership?
We have a partnership because what we did,
okay,
I can tell you today, 6 years later, and Governor Baker can comment on this, there have been massive investments of money by the professional leagues, not only
so
through
you're
structure.
Confident enough is being done?
I am confident we are on a good path.
Okay.
In this industry, you should never be confident with the status quo.
Okay.
You should always look to new ways and new technologies that allow for information to be shared and risk assessments to be implemented.
Great. Let me move on.
Yes.
Mr. Levant, I want to come to you. Thank you for your op-ed on COSA. I know Senator Blumenthal and I appreciate that support, and he and I have worked tirelessly to make certain that kids are protected in the virtual space. And one of the things that is so troubling is that there are not protections against gambling for kids in the virtual space. It seems to be pretty easy, unfortunately, and we know that it is harmful, it is addictive. And what more can be done to keep children from participating?
Senator, thank you for the question, and thank you for your leadership on this issue. There are two initial thoughts that come to mind. The first deals with the overall normalization of the relationship between gambling and sports. If you are a 12-year-old child, you don't know sports without it being attached to gambling. I urge the members of the committee to watch a primetime basketball game on network television, and you will see that during the pregame show at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the pregame show is sponsored by a gambling company. They are talking about betting. They are making suggestions for betting. Gambling has taken over sports, and for children, the normalization of gambling, which is a known addictive product, and making it part of sports is one of the most long-term problematic aspects of this. The second thing, Senator, is I'm not going to do it right now. I have my phone in my pocket. I don't have an account. I'm a person in recovery from gambling addiction. But with 2 clicks of my thumb, I could get into an online sports book, just like a 9-year-old could. Now, that's not to make a bet, but it's to see all of the gambling activity. It is ridiculous to me that each state permits this. There are age barriers to making bets, but not for looking.
Okay.
So those are
My
two
time
things
is expiring, and I do want to move on, and I want to have further conversations with you on that.
Certainly, thank you.
Before I turn it back, Governor Baker, I want to highlight with you my concerns over some of the harassment that happens to our athletes online, especially our female athletes. I will visit with you separately. I am still disappointed that there is not an NCAA policy to protect women in competition. You all have had time to do this. Our female athletes deserve it. And if you're going to partner up on gambling and other things, and we applaud that, you have got to make certain that you are protecting women's sports for women. We hear about this every single week from female collegiate athletes and their concerns. You all have the ability to do better. It is important that you do better, and it is important, it is imperative that you protect opportunity for women in sports. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I am very appreciative to you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and to the witnesses who are here today, not only for appearing, but for your good work and your help to me in drafting the Safe Bet Act and the GRID Act, Mr. White, Mr. Levant, Mr. Baker particularly. You know, we are in the midst of a sports betting boom that is one of the most severe public health problems today. It is the cause of addiction for millions of Americans with severe gambling problems. It's tearing apart families, literally divorces, abandonment. It's a criminal justice problem when people get into trouble and they have to pay back the debts that they owe. When I was U.S. Attorney, I prosecuted extortion and enforcement by the gangs. And of course, it is a unemployment problem and a mental health, behavioral health problem. You know, the nomenclature and the techniques and the sophistication of the trading practices here make Wall Street look like child's play. The risk-free bet, the throttling, the targeting of losers, customizing bets to those who are losing and throttling back the winners. I mean, the plethora of techniques is staggering here, all to the benefit of the corporations that are profiting here. And Mr. Baker, as you may know, colleges initially were partners in some of these efforts. I wrote to 66 of them, and they stopped the partnership that promoted gambling on their campuses. And so there really is a kind of shamelessness here. I want to ask for your support for the Safe Bet Act, which would establish minimum national standards. Right now we have a patchwork of half-hearted regulations. The Safe Bet Act would, in effect, also provide more public health benefits to try to provide some relief to people who are now addicted. And those minimum standards would be set by the Department of Justice. States would still have responsibility, but they'd have to meet those minimum standards that would eliminate the kinds of promotions, ads, pitches, and deceptive techniques that right now are so rampant. So let me just ask you, in the interest of time, would all of you support the Safe Bet Act? Let me go down with Mr. Baker first.
I'm familiar with certain elements of it. I'm not familiar with all of it. I can tell you the elements I am familiar with, we do support. And the one thing I would add to some of the stuff you've talked about is when you have 39 states that have legalized sports betting, in every single state, the data they collect is different, who they can share it with is different, and how they can and who they can share it with is different. And so you have a situation where it is really hard to get kind of a national sense about what's going on. New Jersey probably has one of the best data collection programs in the country, but I think the data thing in particular should not be underestimated as an opportunity. And I love the fact that your legislation basically prohibits prop bets on college sports. It would save me a lot of running around.
Mr. Batamosi.
I'm not familiar with every detail of the Safe Bet Act, but in the interest of protecting the health and wellness of the athletes and protecting the athletes against universities and these entities that are in partnership with betting companies that are literally like, I'll support it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. White.
As with NCAA, there's a lot of details in there that we really like, but because it starts by prohibiting sports betting, at least temporarily, the National Council must remain neutral because we're neutral on legalized gambling.
Senator, I really don't represent here anybody but myself, and my comments in my written testimony and my oral indicate that this is not a good bill to move forward because I believe after 6.5 years of litigation to the states to earn the rights, constitutional rights to have sports wagering, that we are entitled to do the best we can to regulate and deal with the issues that are highlighted here, which I agree many of them need to be continued to be dealt with in ways that we can improve upon. That being said, aspects of your bill that talks about the need for safeguards, the need for guardrails, the need to work on responsible gaming aspects of reducing the risk of people falling into harm, those are all shared by every jurisdiction today that engages in gambling. And as you well know, we have 10 states right now, 7 of which are represented by members here, that have no sports wagering, no legal sports wagering.
No legal
sports wagering.
No legal sports betting.
Yes.
A lot of sports betting
Thank you.
illegally.
But my point to you is...
And I appreciate your support.
Okay.
I've run out of time, Mr. Lamont.
Having helped your office and Congressman Tonko write the bill, my answer is yes, and I'm prepared to answer any questions about why the bill sets appropriate public health standards by the federal government. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Kennedy.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. about 90% of my personal philosophy is don't hurt someone unless they're trying to hurt you. Don't take other people's stuff, and leave me alone. So I'm pretty libertarian when it comes to gambling. Within reason, if someone wants to gamble, they can. But I do want to ask you this, Mr. Rebuck. Can you name me one form of legalized gambling where the House doesn't have a decided advantage?
The gambling industry always has the advantage, as you are correctly indicating.
Okay.
The point is that the consumers know that.
That's, I'm sorry to cut you off. I just don't have much time. Governor Baker, the NCAA exists in part to promote fair competition in collegiate sports, does it not? Could you speak into the mic for me?
Yes.
Okay. A transgender woman is a biological male. Is that correct?
Yes.
And a biological male is always going to have a physical and a physiological advantage competing in a collegiate sport against a biological female. Isn't that true?
There's not a lot of research on it, but it's certainly debatable.
You think it's debatable?
I think it's debatable.
Wait, you don't think?
You mean with
think that a biological male has an advantage every time competing against a biological female? Is that your testimony?
No, I think defined the way you defined it, yes, I would agree with you.
So you agree with me?
Yes.
Okay. So why does the NCAA, why do you, your job is to promote fairness in collegiate sports. Why do you support allowing transgender women who are biological males to compete against non-transgender biological females?
Over the course of the past 2 years, 5 federal court cases involving this question, let me finish. 5 federal judges have all sided with participation as the standard. This is a very...
So you're saying you don't have a choice?
I'm saying that under the current dynamic, there is not clarity on this issue legally.
Well, why don't you exhibit leadership and demonstrate leadership and provide clarity? If you agree with me,
well, first of all,
that the purpose of the NCAA is to promote fair competition, and if you agree with me that in every single instance, a biological male is going to have an unfair advantage over a biological female, then why don't you just say, look, in America you can be whomever you want to be, but in terms of fair competition in a collegiate sport, transgender women who are biological males are not going to be allowed to compete against non-transgender women who are biological female. Boom, done. Why don't you take that position, Charlie?
Because federal courts have already taken the position that they do have the right to compete.
Yeah,
5 times in the past year and a half.
You can disagree and be sued. Why don't you demonstrate some leadership?
I would love to work with you folks on creating clarity around this question.
I'm sorry, but look, I'm sure the NCAA is a good organization. I just can't figure out what you folks are good for. I know you take in bucket loads of money and you share some of it. You make that money off the backs of these kids. Your predecessor, who was a good man, took home $2.8 million a year in salary. I'm not going to ask you what you make, but I bet you didn't take a pay cut. You take in bucket loads of money. We got problems in collegiate sports with the transfer portal and the NIL and now gambling and biological males, you allowing biological males to compete against biological females. And you folks at the NCAA don't do anything except sit there watch, cash your checks, and suck on your teeth.
I would argue that we've made a lot of progress on a bunch of those
Why don't
issues.
you take a position on transgender biological males competing against females? You just told me it wasn't fair.
There's a federal standard on this is one that we would work with you on if you wish to work on it.
Why don't you do it on your own?
Because we're a national
what you're
governing
there
body
for,
and we
Charlie.
follow federal law.
That's what you're there for. Why don't you stand up and say in front of God and country, federal law is wrong, and the NCAA believes in fair competition. We also believe in equality. If you want to, in America, you can be whatever you want to be. You can be whomever you want to be. But our job is to promote fairness in sports.
Our job.
Biological males are not going to be allowed to compete against biological females. Why don't you go to Amazon and buy a spine online and take a stand?
Thank you, Senator Kennedy. Next is Senator from Vermont. Senator Schiff, I'm sorry, from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for holding this hearing, which has been fascinating. Learned a lot about sports betting just asking my college-age son about it, and learned just how extraordinarily popular it is, how it really has become a cultural phenomenon on college campuses. Governor Baker, I just want to say I'm originally from Framingham, have a lot of Schiff family and Glovsky family still in the state, all who speak very highly of you, and you managed to leave after 2 terms as popular as when you went in, which is a remarkable feat for any governor these days in these challenging times, so congratulations. I wanted to ask a couple questions, and Governor, I'd like to ask you just very generally, sports have always been a dominant feature on campus, and they contribute so much to the life of a campus, and not just the student athletes, but all the students and alumni, and drive a lot of the resources to the campuses. Now this seems to be so accentuated by sports betting, driving more attention, more money, more resources to this one part of campus life. Is there a risk that everything else becomes overwhelmed by all the money going into sports and sports betting on campuses? And how do campuses preserve some balance in the light of that, and the contract that the chairman was talking about, Bill Belichick, and how much is devoted to this one feature? And the second question for anyone is, how does this throttling work, where people who are successful are throttled down and can't compete as much, can't bet as much, and people who are losing their shirt are targeted? Have states tried to regulate that as they have with prop betting? I think prop betting should be banned. It sounds like it does nothing but create enormous problems for athletes. But how does this other phenomenon of throttling work, and is there any justification for it?
I can speak to the first question, not so much to the second one. I would just say that first of all, there's 500,000 student athletes. There are 1,100 schools, and for the vast majority of them, the experience on campus is not driven in many respects by a really significant growth in revenue. I mean, most of them look a lot like they looked when they were playing these games 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. But they teach all the same lessons that all sports teach in terms of your ability. And by the way, Senator, congratulations, University of Vermont, a classic example of one of those kinds of schools that won the D1 soccer championship yesterday. I can continue, yeah.
Let's not forget the Broncos Division II leaders in California.
Of course, the Broncos, yes, that's right, Cal Poly.
Feeling competitive with Vermont right now.
But those are great examples of exactly what we're talking about. I think the big issue for us coming in has been enhance the benefits that we make available to student athletes, come up with a model, working with the plaintiffs in several particular cases, to create a model to provide additional benefits to the kids who play at the schools that make the most money, and then do what we can, especially in this space, to provide as much protection to them as we can, and to give them a lot of guidance and advice. We run the largest sports betting integrity program on a per game basis in the world. We also run the largest in-person education program for student athletes of any kind, anywhere in the world around sports betting. And we've put a tremendous amount of effort into driving this conversation around prop betting and have had a fair amount of success to the point where we have 19 states left we need to move. But and we also track all the abuse and harassment that comes at student athletes who participate in our major championships, and created a fair amount of public conversation about that when we released that data earlier this year. I think the challenges, especially at the highest end, are profound, and I think we should be doing everything we can to help kids there. And in particular, the prop bet one is a great opportunity to do something in the right direction.
Senator, if I may, to your point about the prevalence of wagering on campus, Charlie's group did a survey that showed the majority of young male college students have placed a sports bet in the past year. The other striking finding from our study is that one of the biggest predictive factors of sports betting is educational status. Unlike other forms of gambling, where it's negatively correlated, the higher your education, the less likely you are to bet. In America today, the more education you have, the more likely you are to bet on sports. So there's this cohesion now of sports and athletics, athletics and education, which we've always had, but now that gambling is so tied in with sports, now education is one of the biggest predictive factors. We don't see that with sports betting anywhere else in the world, and we don't see that with any other form of gambling in America. So there's a real concern about how we reach these young, educated men who have this huge propensity to bet on sports and unfortunately are at highest risk for gambling addiction.
Senator, may I take the second part of your question very quickly? I run a patient treatment group, and my patients know I'm here today, and I asked them if there was one message I could deliver. And 14 of the 15 all told me the same thing, and that is let elected officials know how they are targeted to keep them gambling. I'll make an offer to you that I've done with Senator Blumenthal, Congressman Tonko, done with the New York Times and CNN and CBS. I would gladly sit down with your staff members, any staff member, and show you while we watch a game together how the rapid fire and the VIP programs keep people in action. I think members of this committee need to be educated on that so it can be addressed.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Schiff. Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Baker, if I could just start with you. I confess I didn't understand your answer to Senator Kennedy's question about the safety of women in the sports of the NCAA overseas. Did you say the federal law requires the NCAA to permit biological men to play in women's sports?
No, I said there have been 5 cases in federal court in the past 18 months. And
okay, because I thought you told him that
federal judges sided with participation.
The reason the NCAA couldn't take a position on this, in fact, you have taken a position on it, you're affirmatively permitting biological men in women's sports. But you said to him it's because of federal law. There's no federal law that requires it, right? The relevant federal law is Title IX, is it not? You're familiar with Title IX.
If guidance on this issue from Title IX or guidance with respect to discrimination law would be
Title
important.
IX is already the law. Title IX says
federal judges have ruled on
this. It's 20 U.S.C. Section 1681A. By the way, let's just dispense with that canard. No federal court has ordered the NCAA to include biological men in women's sports, right? There's not a single case that has ordered the NCAA to do so, correct?
That's pretty much what they decided in the San
No, don't
Jose
say pretty
case.
much. We're talking about the law here.
Yes,
and
I know.
And you actively dissembled to Senator Kennedy just a second ago. It's not true that the NCAA has been ordered by any court, number one. It's not true that federal law requires you to include biological males. In fact, Title IX explicitly says no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be denied the benefits of any educational program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. You are in court at this moment arguing that Title IX doesn't apply to the NCAA, which is astounding to me given the amount of money, federal money, the NCAA gets. But let me just ask you this.
Senator,
a total of 5 teams, 5 women's volleyball teams, Wyoming, Southern Utah, Utah State, Nevada, and Boise State all had to forfeit 7 games in their conference play, NCAA conference play this past year, women's teams, because a biological male under your rules was playing on a rival's team. How is that not denying them the benefits of the sport? Why is this fair to women?
And when that issue went to federal court, the judge sided with participation.
No, the NCAA did not go to court.
No,
that is
when
not true.
The federal judge made the decision with respect to the issue you just raised.
Your rules have not been tried in federal court, and your rules explicitly permit biological males in women's sports. And I am asking you, why is that fair to the women? All of these women on these teams had to forfeit games and therefore a chance to compete in the championship because of your rules. And I want to know, why is that protective of women? That's my question.
So far, the federal government on the court side has issued decisions several times.
No, I'm not asking you about the
year.
courts. I know what the courts have done. Not one of them
that's
has
their
ordered the
interpretation of
NCAA.
federal law.
This is your policy, which you will not defend because, frankly, it's indefensible. Why are you, Mr. Baker, why are you allowing biological men to play in women's sports?
Because we believe that's consistent with federal policy.
So we're right back to your testimony is you believe you're compelled to do it by federal law. You would change it otherwise?
We believe our policy. I said in my opening comments to Senator Kennedy, the clarity on this issue at the federal level would be very helpful.
Oh, that is such a cop-out. In other words, somebody else please do it for us. Keep sending us the money. We'll go to court and argue that Title IX doesn't even apply to us.
We do not take a dime in federal money, not a dime.
Is that why you're arguing Title IX doesn't apply to you?
Yes, part of it, yes.
You honestly think you shouldn't be subject to Title IX?
We don't believe we currently are. In federal court has
amazing.
Federal court has affirmed
Absolutely
that on a number
amazing.
Of
You have a pending lawsuit right now from female athletes who are suing you because you allow biological men not only in their sports but also in their locker rooms. Why do you do that, by the way? Why do your guidelines allow biological men into women's locker rooms without the women's consent? Without the women's foreknowledge? Why do you do that?
That's not what our guidelines say.
They do say that. I've got them right here. Your guidelines say that transgender student athletes should be able to use the locker room, shower, and toilet facilities in accordance with their gender identity.
And
here they are, right here.
And then everybody else should have an opportunity to use other facilities if they wish to do so.
Okay, so the burden's on the women. So if the women then want to move to a different facility, in other words, if they want to abandon their own locker room, you're saying that they should have to do that? So in other words, it's their problem?
No, we put a significant amount of emphasis on what the locals' plans are, and we make sure that everybody.
What does that mean, the locals' plans?
Whoever it is that's hosting the event.
You have guidelines that instruct them what the best practices are, and your guidelines say that biological men can go in and use the women's locker rooms if they want to. What the women want has nothing to do with it. They're not mentioned in here at all, correct? Correct. It's right here. You just reaffirmed them in May of this year. I've got them. I'm reading them. I've got them off your website.
I believe our guidelines give people optionality with respect to how they choose to use their facilities. And many,
what does that even mean? Optionality. What it says is transgender student athletes will be able to use the locker room, shower, and toilet in accordance with their gender identity. That means men will be able to use the women's locker rooms. And as Riley Gaines and others have testified before this committee, that means if a man, a biological man, wants to use their locker room, they just have to accept it. Or else the women have to go somewhere else. They've got to go find an alternative. Why is that fair?
We told the local folks who've hosted our tournaments they need to create accommodations for the people who are playing.
You know, so it's the feds on the one hand, it's the locals on the other hand. The only person who doesn't seem to bear any responsibility in this is you and the NCAA, who are the governing body. And your testimony here today is you're not even subject to Title IX. Mr. Baker, I can't tell you how disappointed this makes me, but not just disappointed, frankly, infuriated for the student athletes who are suffering because of your policies, and you won't even defend them. You won't even take responsibility. It's outrageous. It's totally outrageous.
Expired. Senator Welch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the witnesses. Thanks for the shout out. Going back to gambling, could you talk a little bit more about what the emotional pressure is on the student athletes, Mr. Baker, Governor Baker?
Well, if you talk to, my first suggestion to all of you would be to talk to some of the kids who are on your campuses about this issue and ask them to show you some of the stuff that shows up in their phones, which we've seen. Or sit behind the bench at one of their contests and listen to the noise that's directed at them from people in the stands. part of the reason we released the results of the data we collected from our previous engagements with championship data collection was to point out to people how aggressive and, in some cases, brutal the incoming a lot of these young people get.
So that's
And
all pressure from bettors who
Yes.
want an outcome.
In fact,
and
we've
are holding them accountable
one of our
for what that outcome
one
is.
of our championships, we literally put 24/7 police protection around one of the teams because of the legitimacy of the threat that they received from a bettor when we showed it to local law enforcement.
And how much pressure is there on kids to participate in the sports betting, the athletes themselves?
They get a lot of pressure from their, I mean, this is something this might have all been before your time, thank God. But a big part of the abuse that's coming from the stands also involves classmates, schoolmates, friends, who literally talk to them in a way where they basically say, look, you're my friend. I'm not looking for you to lose a game. I just need you to miss the first 2 free throws. And
that's the prop bet.
And that's the prop bet.
Right.
And
Batamosi, you want to speak
Yeah, I
about
can
that?
comment on it. I think
Thanks.
I think the pressure comes, or one is an athlete succumbs to pressure when they're in need, and if they don't have the money to buy a meal or pay for gas, then they might succumb to that pressure.
They've got opportunity. They got the need that you mentioned.
Yeah. Now, some universities take better care of their athletes than others.
All right. I want to ask another question about marketing and the use of AI that you've all described. One of the questions I have that hasn't been a topic of this hearing is the concentration of the betting industry in 3 or 4 companies. And Senator Lee and I have sent a letter to the FDC really inquiring about whether there are antitrust issues here. And obviously, in any market, not just this one, competition's important. And one question I have is whether the more we allow for competition, some companies may have better practices than others. I don't know if that would be helpful or not. But I'd be interested, sir, in your comments on that.
Senator, I believe it goes to the need for minimum federal standards because some of these companies have become so large, and I specifically mentioned in my opening testimony DraftKings, who has recently purchased an artificial intelligence company.
Right, I heard that.
So what they have is the capacity not only to control markets, but to use the technology to target vulnerable customers with the most addictive forms of what's called micro betting.
So that, you get that capacity. That's an incredibly powerful marketing device because people are susceptible to that addiction, that micro-targeting on the betting.
And that's why what the Safe Bet Act does is it specifically addresses, as a federal standard, these standards for in-game micro betting, so that while the Justice Department deals with issues such as competition, what, from a public health perspective, Congress can deal with is which forms of these bets should actually be permitted and which are simply too dangerous from a public health perspective. And that's what the Safe Bet Act would do, sir.
But Senator, if I may, in some sense, arguing about what types of bets to limit and prohibit or allow ignores the fundamental nature of addiction, which is that it flourishes regardless of legalization or regulation, and which is why we support the GRID Act that would provide for the first ever federal support for states like Vermont to establish the kinds of prevention, treatment, and research we need to address this.
Mr. Rivak, thank you for that. I understood you wanted the states to be able to make the decisions, but it seems to me that it helps a state. I used to be a state legislator. If there are standards, you're not then arguing about exceptionalism where there's some self-interest at stake in the form of revenue. So why would that be a problem from your perspective?
Well, let me comment first on the harassment of student athletes. I share that concern. Everybody shares that concern. As Governor Baker understands, New Jersey affirmatively reached out to every Division I college in its state and made it very clear to them, if at any time a student comes to you, an athlete or any student, you have an affirmative duty to refer that matter to law enforcement, and this Assistant Attorney General has state troopers who are prepared to engage in investigations and use all the tools at our disposal if they are a gambler.
Well,
and go after them.
I don't mean to
Now-
interrupt, but I'll interrupt.
Go ahead.
Well, what Governor Baker said was that a lot of the harassment is around the prop betting.
That's gambling.
Right, but why wouldn't that help you? Rather than have
Because-
all this after-the-fact investigation and protection of
Because
athletes,
here's the end result.
just prohibit prop betting so the
Here's the
students
end
don't get
result.
hammered on that.
We have 10 states that have no gambling at all. We have 15 states that have bans against betting on in-state college events in their state, including their student athletes. We have the letter I reached out to and referred to. Many of these cases, I wish they had been referred to us to investigate and handle and treat as criminals. The response to that in New Jersey is very low and in many ways non-existent. I'm not saying harassment doesn't exist. I'm just saying the tools are there to make enforcement.
My time is
true.
up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Welch. Although this is a hearing that is nominally dedicated to the issue of gambling and sports and like, other issues have arisen. I want to give Governor Baker an opportunity to complete a few answers that he may not have had the chance. But I'd like to ask you a question or two. How many athletes are there in the United States in NCAA schools?
510,000.
How many transgender athletes are you aware of?
Less than 10.
Less than 10 out of 510,000?
Yep.
Are you governed when it comes to the policy of the NCAA by state law?
Of course.
So if 25 of the 50 states currently say that transgender children can play in sports according to their gender identity, you're bound by that standard?
Yes.
Is there anything else you'd like to say on this subject?
I think part of our challenge is dealing with a very murky set of court decisions and at the state and federal level around this issue, which creates a certain lack of clarity around our policy, because our policy ultimately needs to comply with federal policy. Which is why guidance either on the regulatory side or on the statutory side would be very helpful.
510,000 athletes, 10 transgender athletes nationwide?
Or less.
I assume the NCAA is also concerned with other issues in women's sports?
The harassment that I speak of is far more prevalent in major women's championships than it is in men's championships. And in fact, the data that we put forward from our major championships last year showed that the worst examples of online threats, abuse, and harassment were being directed at women basketball players playing in our women's basketball tournament. That, in many respects, I think, is not as well known as it should be. We tried to do a pretty good job to promote it and make clear to people that that was, in fact, the championship that had the most brutal and the most troubling and the nastiest collection. And all we know of is what shows up on their public handle. We don't know what's on the stuff they're getting in their direct messages. We talked to a lot of the folks who played in those tournaments, and they said the stuff that comes in on their DMs is a lot worse than the stuff that we see on their public handle.
I wish my colleagues who share my concern and yours for the future of women's sports could have heard your testimony. I think it's very important. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. This is not the end of this discussion, but only the beginning. And as we see, there are many aspects to this whole issue in terms of the future of sports, treatment of athletes, basically gaming industry nationwide, which is a very viable and important part of the economy, and whether or not it will establish standards that are sensitive to the individuals who are being affected by the current standards. As I said at the outset, this is the last meeting of the Senate Judiciary Committee, last scheduled meeting. It's been my honor to serve as chairman. I wish everyone the very best. The Senate Judiciary will stand in recess and adjournment.